Welcome back to the Thought Balloons podcast. I am your host, Jeff Folsham. With me today is my good friend, Nick Stapleton. I have played many a session of D&D with him, played many a video game with him as well. But more than that, and more interestingly to me, he is currently in his last semester of nursing school, which anyone who has listened to the first episode of this knows that my dad was a doctor. So medicine is sort of a thing that I'm in the orbit of. And I am very excited to talk today about Nick's interest in the field of medicine. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
So yeah, man, right off the bat, first I want to say fucking congratulations, dude. Like nursing school in general, I can only imagine how fucking hard and rigorous something like that is. So to be, just a few months from graduation is both amazing, and I gotta assume that feels really, really good.
Yeah, it's been a journey for sure. And let me tell you, going to school to take care of people in a global pandemic is a lot weirder than I thought it'd be, if that's even possible. We've been, restricted on our access to hospitals for clinicals, and it's been difficult to learn by watching videos of students from previous semesters do what we should be out there doing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But despite that, it's been a great experience. This being my second time through college, a little bit older, a little bit wiser, better on the decision making, a little more direction in my career,
Right.
and being surrounded by like-minded individuals. This is a program for people pursuing a second degree, so there is a huge breadth of people within my cohort there's about 50 of us in the class, and man, I love almost every single one of them. Like all walks of life, all really passionate about wanting to help people, about their education. Absolutely. Everybody pushes each other. And I mean, there are no slouches. Our class actually hasn't lost anybody, which from the beginning,
Wow.
which considering, the global situation is pretty impressive.
I mean, I think that's just impressive anyway, because like at least from what my dad has told me about, like medical school for being like a physician anyway, like that seems to be a I forget like the fancy word for it, but like a lot of people seem to drop out of those
Yeah.
fields.
Hmm.
Like it seems to have like a high man, the words on the tip of my tongue and I just can't remember. I think the word may be reticence, but I don't think that's the right word. Anyway, yeah, it just seems like a lot of people drop out. So to hear that in the face of a global pandemic, there are nobody has dropped out from your class. Like that's amazing to hear. And like not just the tenacity, but like hopefully these are like the cut of people who are in it because they actually want to like help people, which just is a comforting notion to me.
Yeah. And, it's reinforced by the fact that this is kind of your second go around, right?
Mhm.
Not to discredit anybody. I mean, I went to college for the first time, right? And but I definitely, being older now, there is a sense of focus, a sense of
Right.
yeah, this is really what I want to do now. I mean, going to college at 18, I think if I could do it again, I probably would have taken like a gap year or something between college and high
Mhm.
school,
Mhm.
just to kind of get myself on the right track. But it's where I'm at now, and light at the end of the tunnel. So just gotta push through to the end.
Hey man, I can relate to that in a big bad way, man.
Mm.
I believe I mentioned, I think it was like a good freaking 30 minutes of what I talked about in the first episode where I was just blathering about myself. I went to film school before I went to, art school, and
Yeah,
the focus of the second time around, um definitely, like, that is a huge mood, as they say.
yeah,
uh like, if I had gone to art school in the beginning, like, I probably wouldn't have maintained, like, what I think I graduated with, like, it's not something to brag about, like, in general, like a 3.2, I think, is like what my GPA was. Like, it's not bad, but like, I think bragging, it's like a solid B or whatever, right?
I mean that's around what mine undergrad GPA was. Yeah.
But it is a huge step up from when I left Penn State with a 1.1.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just not the right time, or I mean,
Yeah.
I used to kind of brush off when people would say college isn't for everybody, back in the day, but now I know it really isn't for everybody. And
Yeah. And it's, I can only hope that the younger generation, uh, people younger than us, like the folks who are in grade school and high school right now, I hope that they can see what our generation has gone through with, like, putting ourselves into debt, uh with, loans, only to then not be able to get a job because you either need X number of years experience beforehand, which is impossible for an entry level job, or, you know sometimes you have too many qualifications, to get the thing.
sure.
Like, the boomers, as they say, really pushed everyone, you go to get a college degree and you'll get a better job, but that's not necessarily the case. you know there
Yeah,
are
and
many sanitation workers out there
yeah.
who get, hazard pay and things like that, who make way better money than people with a college degree. So,
Oh
like,
yeah, and like the trades, like heating and cooling engineer. Um, there's a lot of options out there that don't require a 4-year degree, an associate's or just trade school. And you
mhm.
make many trades will make more their first year than nurses do. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I know it's something that my dad talks about a lot. Having been in private practice for over 30 years. I don't know. I don't have any personal opinions on this other than, what is fiscally responsible for myself. But I know he has often talked about not wanting to go into, like, socialized medicine, because he's already, like, we live in a very small town. Um, he could have gone into medicine in a city and, like, gone the I'm gonna make as much money as I can kind of route, like, he could have been had that attitude that Doctor Strange has, right?
Yeah,
Of just like, I'm gonna be making lots of money and drive a Porsche or whatever. But no,
off a
he
cliff.
went into, yeah, off a cliff. But no, he went into medicine to, like, actually, like, help people, and he lives in a very small town. I think I said this at some point. Uh, I know I said at some point within the last few days. I don't know if it was on a podcast or not, but, like, there was one time that I can remember that he accepted a goat as payment from an Amish family who couldn't pay him to, like, perform a medical procedure. So he,
No
like,
kidding.
yeah, so he, like, ate the actual cost of that thing, but, like, they felt bad, so they, like, gave him, like, a goat. Like, they, slaughtered a goat and filled our freezer, and we ate goat meat for a few months, right? And which
There
is
you go.
delicious, but, like, it's one of those things where, like, he's not in it for the money. So, like, one of the things he is worried about is, like, well, not anymore, because he's retired, but like one of the things he was railing against during the Obama thing was like Obamacare and how like it's gonna like affect his ability to like actually survive in a really small town, right? There's like all these problems with like insurance and stuff, so like yeah, nurses and medical people who are not in it to make money and are actually in it to help people have all those loans on top of it, and then like you have like the bureaucracy of the hospitals and all that stuff. Like
Yeah.
man, I it's people talk about like starving artist syndrome, but like let's be real, man. Like we need to actually support like the people in the healthcare field and the people who actually like protect our well-being. you know like dear god, like man, I think there's too much focus on like the big fancy city doctors and not enough attention paid to middle America, as it were.
Yeah.
But speaking of those sorts of things, and talking about how my dad like got into it for altruistic purposes, um what uh I know from talking to you, we've been friends for a long time. I know you're in it to help people as well. What is the impetus for that? Like what I think I'm a fairly empathetic guy, but I'm not spending my whole life trying to help people like in the same way that you are. What do you think is the motivation for you to like want to be in medicine?
Well, um, for all of us, um, the sum of our, kind of like life experiences can kind of mold um, what it is we want to do when we get old. And I'm not really any different. I have um, some connection through my family to the medical field that kind of spurred some interest early on. But I'd say the kind of the deepest root to my desire to go into medicine and help people in that respect is just a general kind of desire that I've had to help people for most of my life, as long as I can remember. Um, I'm not sure I could exactly put, a particular mentor or lesson that kind of drove that home, but I know I was raised Roman Catholic, and I'm not practicing anymore, but um, for all of the problems that the church has, and for all of the bad press it gets, sometimes deservedly, um, there are some core lessons to not just Roman Catholicism, to many religions that are, I in my humble opinion, just good ways to live one's life. Um,
Yeah,
Things like the golden rule, things like
exactly.
um, caring for your fellow man. Um, teaching a man to fish over just giving them a fish. These kinds of lessons that should be applied, carefully, but when practiced daily can, I think, really lead to a fulfilling life. And so, being raised on those values, I've been very involved in helping people through community action, things like helping out with like a community garden at the church, or helping with fundraisers at the school, doing like a various functions around the city that my mom would drag us to at first, but I eventually enjoyed going to. There was one we did for the mentally slow. There was like a dinner function that had like music and dance. It was supposed to be for people with mental retardation and other deficiencies to come out and enjoy time with their family, and there was like prizes and everything. Um, and of course, I was in scouting.
Mhm.
You and I both Eagle Scouts.
Yep.
Um, And so I did plenty of community outreach through that. My first job was through the Boy Scouts. I worked at a day camp where, I helped kids make sure they didn't get injured, shooting arrows at an archery range. And all of these, community focused activities, plenty of like service hours through high school and grade school, and scouting, of course. Um, there was this defining moment where I kind of discovered that helping people, just releases a flood of serotonin in my brain.
Right.
When my parents had me do this like vocational testing when I was in high school. They were very focused on, trying to find me a career, something very highly esteemed, doctor, lawyer, and I don't remember. It wasn't like Myers-Briggs, but it was kind of like a psychological slash vocational test that I took,
Gotcha.
kind of a big, long, fancy thing, and um,
The general occupancy aptitude test.
something similar to that. And
Okay.
it didn't so much, tell me, there wasn't a piece of paper where it was like, you're going to be a lawyer and like that's your best fit. It was more like this. I mean, it was pages and pages. I remember, I think it was like 14 or 15 at the time. It was a lot to take in. I was just kind of sitting there. It was with like a psychologist, and my parents were there with me, and he like pulls out this big manila like folder that's like probably a couple dozen pages thick. And he pulls out the print and he pulls it forward and like starts pulling out these pages with graphs and like all these percentages on it, and basically tells me, you know, you have a lot of options for, what you might enjoy as a career, because really, and he showed me this one page, and it was like 99% affinity for like altruistic personality tendencies, just wanting to help others. And my parents were really happy with that, honestly. And there were subsets to that, because when you break it down, you can help people in generally anything you do. Art can help people find
Mhm.
inspiration or pull them from very dark periods in their life. Um, Working in a restaurant, you can help people to feed their families, to have a good night out, to de-stress after a bad week at work. All the way up the totem pole, lawyers and doctors obviously help people with very important and serious matters. Um, and so there were a lot of, I think I had probably several dozen different occupations listed at like 70% or above affinity, mostly along like the sciences and a little bit in the math, because I've always been good at math, but I've never really liked it.
Right.
So, you know, all of this being slapped in front of me when I was 14, I had no like concept of like, I mean, lawyer, sure, that sounds
That's a
weird.
yeah.
That's kind of what you do, Dad, right? And that's not at all what my dad does. Uh, and
Is he like a CPA?
he's a like, yeah, like a financial advisor. Um,
Yeah.
so um, anyway, I kind of sat on that for a while, and through high school, I worked some summer jobs, and but it definitely stuck with me. Like, and the more I thought about it, the more I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, when I help people, it makes me happy to make other people happy, um, which can backfire, because then when I don't make other people happy, I'm miserable. Um,
Right.
and there's been some struggling with that, and it's not something that is there all the time, which is also kind of weird, because when that kind of stuff gets put before you in like paper, on paper, it almost creates this kind of obligation to
Hmm.
continually seek it in a way. And while I do really enjoy helping people, I mean, nobody can work all the time constantly, right? You
Right.
have to like, self-care is important.
Exactly.
And so there are times when I get burned out on it on occasion, but um, in general, I do consistently enjoy helping people, from the small things to the bigger things. There was a period where I lived with my parents after college, and um, just being there for them and helping them throughout the day really helped me with what would have otherwise been kind of the burdensome feeling of like, I'm here living with my parents and I'm being a burden on them, which wasn't
Right.
true. They didn't feel that way. But there is that kind of societal pressure
Yeah.
on that particular subject. And so um, I always like to feel as though I am of help to other people.
That
So
is definitely something I can relate to. Still living at home
yeah,
in my
I'm
early
I'm back
30s.
home again
But
actually. As unfortunately the house I was previously at had to be sold by its owner just due to difficulties with the pandemic. Their business
right.
wasn't doing well, so they had to make some extra money to make ends meet. So, and on short notice, my parents let me move back in with them, which I'm blessed to have that option.
Right.
Um, but going back to finding my path to medicine. After going to college, I initially went to college thinking I'd go into med school, and that was kind of that was still kind of like younger Nick, just kind of going through the motions and knowing I liked helping people and figuring, yeah, med school is a great way to do that. Um, but my first couple of years of college definitely shaped my vocational path pretty drastically, just because I had a particularly bad relationship that drew a lot of my attention away from school, and
Right.
there were mistakes on both sides, of course, and I'd definitely do things differently if I could go back, but um, I ended up not getting anywhere close to the grades that I needed to even consider med school, really. I mean, I could have maybe done some of the route that some people do where you can go like overseas and there's like less stringent requirements to get into med schools in other countries.
Right.
But I didn't really want to pursue that. And I was pretty disheartened just because it was a pretty poor academic performance for what I was used to. Um,
Right.
and so I kind of, I had some talk with my parents about it, and I ended up graduating still, of course, but um, in being kind of denied that original goal, it kind of forced me to step back and take a serious look at, okay, I mean, is this really what I want to do then? If I can't, go all the way very easily, I could become a doctor someday, but um, I kind of took a look at the intermediate steps and said, I mean, what's my path to get there? And so I talked with my mom. My mom is a physical therapist. She's been a physical therapist for a little over 30 years now. And we had several longer, frank discussions about um, what working in the medical field is like. And she's worked in hospital systems and old folks' homes. She's kind of been around. So I was able to get a pretty good bead on things from her. And so I decided to get my EMT after college.
Right.
And so I did that at one of the local hospitals and started working for an ambulance company in the state. And that was where kind of my career in medicine moved forward. And it really strengthened the feeling of helping people, just because I think something that's unique about medicine that really drew me to it was just the very intimate person to person nature of medicine. Throughout nursing school, for some of EMT school, it's not as um, pushed in EMS in emergency medical services, is this idea of connecting with your patient and providing kind of like holistic care, being there for them as much as in a professional um, way, as much as kind of a supportive way
Right.
on a more emotional front. And so I enjoyed aspects of working as an EMT, and I did a lot of transport. So rather than taking people to hospitals straight to the ER for emergencies, we were capable of doing that and did that at times. But we did a lot of transferring people from one medical center to another who couldn't, normally go by car, or maybe
Mhm.
somebody
Mhm.
was semi-stable but needed to be transferred somewhere else for higher level care. We would do that kind of transport, or we would take people home from doctor's appointments or to doctor's appointments who couldn't go by car, couldn't go by, like a wheelchair necessarily, more debilitated people who were bedbound.
Gotcha.
And the thing about those people is, in a lot of cases, they don't get a lot of contact. A lot of those people are stuck in a nursing home or in an extended care facility of some kind where the staff care for them. And I don't want to speak badly of those places, but for one staff member, there's usually, 5, 6, maybe even more residents. And so
Right.
they don't get one-to-one contact with people all day around. They'll go hours on end in their rooms without contact, and their families can only come every so often or not at all in some cases. And
Yeah. I
so many of
imagine
these
it's
people
a lot
have,
like being in a large family and children vying for the attention of their parents.
yeah, in a way. And except they can't even rely on each other for attention. They are
Yeah.
not only emotionally isolated, but they are physically isolated. They can't get out of that bed. They cannot
Mhm.
take care of themselves in basic capacities, and that wears down on the spirit. Um, I've had a lot of conversations with people in the back of an ambulance that have been in ways far more memorable than like the crazy calls. I've done CPR. I've had patients bleeding everywhere in the back of my ambulance. But when you look a patient in the eyes who um, just had their husband leave them and try to end their life with a knife, um, slitting their wrists, like it's that kind of stuff sticks with you. And being there for those people is both very difficult and very liberating. Um, even for the short period that you have contact with them. And so after working as an EMT and kind of having a taste of what that connection is like, I knew I wanted more. And nursing is the way to do that. Nursing isn't perfect. Nurses don't one-to-one take care of their patients. Most hospitals try to maintain about 3 patients to one nurse on your standard um, like medical unit.
Right.
But nowadays that's really not done anymore, especially with a pandemic going on.
No, sure.
At
Yeah.
the hospital that I last did clinicals at, they were scraping by maintaining a 4-to-1. So, but even then, I got I spent more time with some of those patients than even the longest periods of time that I spent with patients in my ambulance. Um, and so being able to like constantly go back to those patients and throughout the course of a day, as you're going in there to give them meds, going in to check on them, going in to take vitals, being able to build a rapport with them is a very gratifying experience. In my nursing school, I had advantages there, having an EMT for years prior to this program. Um, there was for some people in my class who have not ever contacted patients before. We have a person in my class who worked in coal mines previously to this.
Wow.
Um, there are some people who were more kind of understandably. I mean, I was when I was first an EMT. They were more timid about approaching other people and developing a rapport and talking to somebody like um, as openly or as candidly as sometimes calls for. And so I was of course very happy to help them and kind of remind them that just think of them as people first, and that's something that's really really important in medicine that sometimes is hard to do, especially in more
Right.
hectic environments like an emergency room.
Oh yeah, definitely that. I remember stories um that my dad would tell me. Um like one of the things that he always uh was kind of annoyed at, it kind of irked him about some of his colleagues, was the sort of emotional distance that they had. I mean, again, go back to pop culture reference, the kind of like that Doctor Strange mentality of they're not they're my patient, but it's the issue, it's the problem, it's the disease
Yeah, it's the
that
scene in the
I'm
car where he's like, "Give me something real." Like this guy's like
yeah,
pitching him like, "Oh, you got to do this surgery," and he's like, "Come on, get that off my plate. I want something real." And it's like,
exactly.
"Okay, dude."
Whereas my dad was always from that angle, like that you had mentioned, like the holistic approach. I don't remember specific examples, but like, you know, I can remember my dad being like, it was one of these things of like, I think because I had worked for him for a bit uh, towards the end of his private practice. You know, I was there like in the transition between him being the owner to like selling it off to the local hospital. And then he was there for a couple of years before like completely retiring and then bringing in like, you know, someone else to like be the ENT in our tiny little town. Right.
Hmm.
And like I can remember probably it was one day, you know, I was kind of annoyed having to stay late at work or something because like I wanted to get back and hop into, you know, Ventrilo with my World of Warcraft buddies, you know, you, your
Those were the
brother,
days.
other Sam, you know, like, and it was probably one of those days when I was just like, I don't get why you're so like late all the time on stuff. Like, even on days when patients are here on time, it's like, there's never a day that you're not behind by the end of it. I was like, what's so hard about 15 minutes in, out, get the next patient, you know? And he was like, well, you can't just come in, hear a list of symptoms, prescribe them some medication and kick them out the door because there, well, there's a lot of different things have overlapping symptoms, right? But like, he's like, sometimes it's not an issue of something necessarily wrong with them. It could be something wrong in their environment that they're like living in. You know, we did a lot of like allergy stuff too, so it could just be like, maybe this person doesn't have a problem with their sinuses, maybe they're like allergic to their cat. Like,
Oh
if
yeah,
you don't ever get to know the person and who they are, like, you're not giving them the best care because there could be a much simpler, less invasive issue, you know, or problem or the solution to an issue, right?
yeah,
I was like,
absolutely.
ah, man, I can't remember the one story, but like he literally, like, it was something like that where like someone had like this chronic breathing issue,
Hmm.
and like he got to know them, and it was like something environmental. Like, it wasn't like an actual, like, they just had to like change the, again, I don't remember the story, but it was something as simple as like change the filters in the air conditioning unit or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
like, but it was one of those things where he was like, you know, if you don't take the time to like get to know these people and like let them be heard, you know, and kind of, you know, find out about them, like,
yeah,
you do them not just a medical disservice but also just like a personal disservice.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and that's something that has been pushed uh pretty consistently in my nursing program is considering the whole of the patient. Um, a great example, we just watched a documentary about um, a one of many, many examples our country has seen over the years of there was a factory that made refrigerators that was shut down in a town in Michigan. And
Mm.
it was in order to, translocate the factory to Mexico for much cheaper labor costs. And so, as a result of this, there were hundreds of workers in this Michigan town that were laid off. And these workers, some of them had pensions, some of them were given severance pay, but the majority of them, the severance pay didn't last them like a year, or it was not a very long period of time that they received any sort of uh, benefit for this. There was no union at this factory, and so they just kind of
Mm.
got dumped off at the side of the road. And so there was the documentary had this psychologist talking about who kind of studied these things in the Michigan area over the years, and he talked about the stress that a major life event like that can put on a person can in of itself cause long lasting medical issues. And there's a
Oh yeah.
biological basis for that, in that when you have a stress response, you release all sorts of hormones, you get your flight or flight if this situation is serious enough. But um, stress hormones like cortisol can
Yeah.
linger in the system, and you can kind of have this like baseline continuous stress response that maintains this higher cortisol level in your system for a long period of time. And that in of itself can cause medical issues like heart disease
Right.
and like GI issues. And so they found all these things and reported them. And it's not even with just specific events, but the documentary went on even further. There was this series of sort of like social surveys done. Um, White was the name for them. It done somewhere in Europe, I want to say, and these these surveys kind of looked at health across the wealth gap, looking at this kind of link. Is health equal to wealth? And what was
Right.
found is, as you would probably expect, the people at the highest levels of wealth are the healthiest, and the people who are at the lowest levels are the lowest. But what they were really interested in was if these were outliers, or if it was kind of a gradient, straight from top to bottom, if it's a straight line.
Right.
And it was. So the second highest is worse off than the first, but they're still better than the third. And the
Hmm.
third is worse off than the second, but they're still better than the fourth. And this goes all the way down. And this was found for stress. It was found for overall health. It was found for life expectancy, incidences of many major diagnoses like diabetes, heart disease,
Hmm.
um, like all these things were consistently more and more prevalent as you travel down the various wealth brackets. And so
Oh yeah, yeah. I
health and
can see how
wellness
that is.
is so intricately tied to everything in somebody's life. You can't really take care of a patient who has a chronic or a complicated problem without looking into those things, looking into their home life. And it's not, hi, how are you, tell me about your relationship with your dad. It's like you build that rapport with the patient, and that's
Right.
not something you can really do in emergency medical services, because
Right.
you're meeting the patient and you got to get them somewhere. I didn't do a lot of emergency transport, but that's what a lot of ambulance transports are, is, hey, I'd love to talk to you about your life philosophy and the time you tried to take your own life when you were 18, but your left leg is missing, so let's get you to the hospital. um, but as a nurse, I can talk to that patient after they've gone through surgery and had that stump you know taken care of. I can talk to them about the accident that their family history you know led them to losing that leg. And there's that aspect of medicine isn't for everybody. I have very good friends in EMS who have said, nope, that 20 minutes is about all the patient contact I can take, and they want those people off their hands. They're very good at what they do, but they are not about the holistic experience. And that
Right.
means that EMS is the perfect place for them, because while that can be important in EMS, and showing you don't have to, like, you can show somebody you care without like going to that level of relationship with a patient, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so there's a lot of great paramedics out there who will tell you that your best medicine is a warm blanket, and showing them, that you're there and you care. Like, that can make a huge difference for a lot of people. Um, and I really enjoy that aspect of medicine, and so I wanted to delve into it further, and so I sought after nursing.
I definitely like the holistic kind of thing. And the thing you said about stress, it reminds me like the stuff like so I've been doing the Noom program here to kind of like retrain my relationship with food and whatnot. I've been doing
Sure.
that for a couple of months now, and that uses psychology and whatnot to like kind of break down um your relationship with food, but it goes further than that. It actually just it's more of just breaking down psychology in general. And there was a few weeks ago, we did learn about like cortisol and stress and all of like the biological stuff. um but the thing that is interesting is like you're talking about that that linear um graph of health versus wealth. And it's definitely something, I've had this thought many times of like, man, if I was just independently wealthy, I would be in a much better place than I am now.
Yeah.
Like for so many reasons, right? Like I mentioned earlier, I'm I'm gonna be 32 here in a couple of months. I'm still living at home with my parents. Um, there's a lot of you mentioned like that sort of you were glad that you could help out at home, so you didn't feel like you were taking advantage of them. My mom is she suffers from chronic traumatic encephalopathy,
Hmm.
CTE. So she needs at this point she needs full-time care.
Yeah.
And and I'm here to like I barely do anything, right? But like I am here in case there are times when my dad's like, hey, I gotta run out real quick and like do this thing, can you just sit with your mom and I'll be back. If he doesn't want to, like, especially with like the pandemic and stuff, like it's hard to corral her when she like wanders off in a store or something, right?
Right.
So I'm here for that, or like vice versa. Like if he's like, hey, I need you to go pick up something, like I can do that, right? So there's that bit of it, but there is still this like this underlying sense of guilt, that like they're paying my bills and they're on a fixed income because they're retired now. I feel like I could be doing more, even though I do everything that my dad asks of me. Like I still could be doing more. And so there's like this whole thing of like the constant pressure for me as a creative person, especially in our internet age of binge content. Like I just keep feeling like I gotta keep producing, gotta keep churning this stuff out. And I was like thinking about it during that week of Noom, talking about like stress and all this stuff and how it's linked to like things like heart disease and all that stuff. But like it really is, man. Like if I was just independently wealthy, I could take take that whole ball of stress and like at least cut it in half, if not more, right? I wouldn't feel the guilt I feel about living at home. I'd, if I wanted to still live here and help out, like that's fine, but I wouldn't be financially dependent on people who are on a fixed income, right?
Yeah.
Um, like if I wanted to move out, I could move out. Um, if I was independently wealthy, I wouldn't feel the pressure to, produce as much content as possible, as fast as possible, right? Like I would be able to take those moments to just kind of like decompress and not feel guilty about that. There's a lot of that stuff that is just like these feedback loops that it's like, man, I feel guilty, and I feel guilty about feeling guilty, but then I feel guilty about feeling guilty about, like it is just like this, man, if only like I don't know if you have heard about the Wall Street bets and the GameStop stuff that's been going on this past week.
I have. I have.
But like
It's been an interesting week for my dad with work.
oh yeah, because your dad's in finance, I can imagine.
Yep.
Um like it's just one of those things of like I on Tuesday I tried to so I signed up for Robinhood, and the only reason I didn't buy AMC stock is that couldn't remember the password to my fucking online bank account.
Oh, gotcha.
But if I had, it was like 17 something, I would have bought, I've got like fucking whatever, man. I'm fucking broke as shit. I've got like just over $200 in my bank account. But because I have that safety net, right? Of like I'm still living at home and like I don't have to worry about where my next meal's coming from.
Yep.
I'm at that position where like, you know, if anyone's obviously this isn't coming out for a while, but like I'm not giving anybody financial advice here. Like if you know 100 $200 is going to make or break your meal budget for the month, like obviously don't play the stock market. It's gambling. It's stupid. Like don't do it. But I just happen to be in a place right now where even though I am broke as fuck, I've got a little bit of money and I have a safety net. And I was like, I'm just gonna buy all my money, just all $200 that I have in my checking account. I'm just gonna put it into AMC and
Put it all on
go,
red.
yeah, and just fucking whatever, YOLO, right?
Hmm.
I don't advertise for commissions all that often. I have one that's kind of brewing in the background. So like there's even a little bit of a safety net there, right?
Yeah.
I do a little bit of like advertising for commissions. I could probably make that $200 back pretty quickly. But it's one of those things of just like, man, I just want to get in on that train because like if I could like double, triple my money, like it's not going to be a lot of money, but like fuck it, right? And especially if you were to really start day trading, you know, buy in at 17, sell at 30. If it goes back down to like 25, buy it at 25, may go up to 40, sell it, ride
Sure.
that wave or whatever. But yeah, man, that talking about like the whole stress thing is like there's so much that I don't do because I feel like I constantly need to be working. And I've experienced some burnout recently, but like, that's just the thing, right? It's like I feel guilty if I'm not working. And that
Yeah.
prevents me from exercising. It prevents I'm trying to eat better at least, but like it prevents me from exercising, in the ways that I would like to. And then because I'm always just sitting like, oh, just one more project, just one more little thing, and then I'll like go do something, and then I finish that. It's like, oh, just one more thing, just one more thing, and that's the constant thing. And then it's like, you know, 5 a.m. and I like fall asleep at my desk, and then sleeping in a chair is terrible for like heart disease and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
Like, it's man, it's insane the feedback loops. It's really interesting to learn like the linear kind of relationship between wealth and being healthy.
Yeah. And even beyond just stress, which can be a function of the situation somebody's in. um that stress or that those unhealthy behaviors have sources from within that person's environment that is created by them being in that particular bracket. So the examples that were given in this documentary is like, if you live in a dangerous neighborhood, you have that constant fear of threat to your life or threat to your possessions or threat to your family. And so that's constant stress. And then you don't feel safe going out in your neighborhood outside of very specific times of the day or specific areas. And so you can't go out and about freely to, say, run or jog. And so
Mm-hmm.
that limits your ability to exercise. And then it also limits your ability to socialize because you don't want to go across to your neighbors or make too much noise. You might attract attention from the wrong places or attract the cops who are suspicious of your neighborhood because there's a lot of violent crime that goes on there. And these constant problems just continually compound. If you have bad public transportation options in your area and you don't have your own form of transportation, that severely limits your access to everything. And even assuming you can get out and about, if all you have around you is fast food options, then you're not going to be able to eat healthy unless you're traveling too far than your budget allows to buy you know food from Whole Foods, which is healthy but also much more expensive than
Oh god, yeah.
going to McDonald's for enough to feed a family. And so all of these compounding problems that have these roots in communities and social networking, and it all just compounds. And it's accentuated by the problem that our country's solution for healthcare and wellness for the past several decades has been to throw all of our money into the hospital systems. And that sounds weird, but the reason that that's a problem is because we're treating the issues as they're appearing rather than treating them before they show up.
Right.
If we were better about providing like public services or access to better parks, better even just public education on a lot of medical issues, stuff that I sometimes am surprised to find is not common knowledge. But then again, I grew up in medicine. You grew up in medicine to an extent, so we have exposure to these things that some people have zero exposure to, and so people don't understand what allergies are. People don't understand what
Mm. Yeah.
how you get sick. And so I mean, we're seeing a
I
lot
mean,
of that with what's going on with the
I
pandemic.
was
People
just
cutting
gonna
holes
say,
in
yeah.
masks, and it is clear that we have a pretty severe deficit of education in our country, and we have this habit of pointing our finger at those people and laughing when really we're the ones with the onus to teach people, right?
Mm-hmm.
With great knowledge, great power comes great responsibility. It's the same thing with knowledge. We need to be, and for some people that becomes their calling, and so you want to go into medicine, you want to teach other people about these things. And so the all of these things, they're termed with something. In our nursing program, we've learned that they're called the social determinants of health, and it is exactly as it reads out. It's the various social mechanisms that affect our health, from kind of like a second degree path. It's not something that directly harms you, but it is this buildup of a lack of resources, of stress, of problems that lead to health issues.
How do you think? Because like, as someone who's like not super knowledgeable about this stuff, on a like a practical level, you know, um, you're thinking about like the whole. You say we have the responsibility of like passing on the knowledge to the people who don't possess the knowledge instead of just pointing our fingers and laughing. Um, how do you approach that though? Because so many people are willfully, and not just willfully ignorant, but just obstinate, about not like they almost make their whole identity around these things, like anti-vaxxers saying like, oh, it's gonna give my kid autism, or whatever, or like, oh, there's mercury in it, and then you're like, well, they used to have mercury but it doesn't anymore, and like you point out like all the facts, but these people are still just digging their heels in, and just refuse to like
Yeah.
um have that sort of knowledge even imparted to them.
Yeah, and there's no easy answer, unfortunately. It there's a lot of it that has to be tailored to the individual. For some of those people, they are obstinate or insistent on a particular axis, for like a root reason, and that kind of goes back to the holistic patient approach that I mentioned earlier, where it is a lot easier to get somebody to listen to your medical advisement when you have actually shown you care and develop a rapport with them. If and that is a common thread that I've heard in stories and things like that, where sometimes people have issues with certain healthcare providers because they walk in the door and they start talking down to you, and they start shooting medical jargon your way and saying, okay, we're going to put you on this medication, you're going to take it these times a day. And they don't. I don't think. I think there's very few medical practitioners who will, not at least give you eye contact, say hello, ask your name, ask how you're doing when they see a patient or see a patient for the first time. But just taking those few extra steps can sometimes break down those barriers of um, unwillfulness. However,
Right.
there will be times that people just will not listen. There are people who are set in their ways. Our country has a very individualistic ideology to it. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of people who believe, it's my way or the highway. And for those patients, really, all we can do is our best. We can show them resources. We can say, look, this is, it's proven medicine. We can provide proof if they want to see it. You provide sources or, you know, medical knowledge. You can point them to, and it's a bit tough because one of the things that I've been really interested to learn about this semester, as we've accumulated all this knowledge for nursing over the course of the uh, program, is how does this realistically get applied in practice? Because we're being pushed to, you know, be holistic with patients and do, full physical assessments every patient every time, and all these things that we've had very brief clinical excursions because of the pandemic. I think we've had a total of 4 actual clinical days where we've been able to provide patient care. So that's like 48 hours.
Hmm.
And it's less than that because we weren't there for 12. But um, the issue became, I went into those clinicals and I watched these nurses at this very good hospital in our area do very quick, succinct, but bare minimum physical assessments and move on to their next patient. And as we're moving between patients, I'd thread in questions like, hey, so our professors have really pushed the idea of doing a full head to toe assessment of a first time patient every single time. And I see you didn't do that there. What was your reasoning? You're not being condescending or challenging, but genuinely wanting to know. And the majority of the answers that I got were, it's just not feasible with our workload. It's feasible when you're thinking about doing it for one patient in front of a professor watching you do it on a dummy. But when you
Right.
consider that you have a 12-hour day with, 4 to 5 patients, sometimes more in some hospital systems, unfortunately, of varying medical stability. Sometimes
Mhm.
you have a patient who has a particular problem. I had one patient spike a fever one day, and we spent 5 hours, probably total, out of the 8 in that person's room. Going over his various wounds, changing things. We found one that had signs of infection, so we had to send something away to doc, and then we had to get a new antibiotic for the patient and hang that and start running it. And literally, we went in to see a different one of our patients who, albeit, was much more stable. We went in to see one of our patients in the morning, about 15 minutes after shift start. Didn't see them again until lunch. 4.5-hour period. Now,
Yeah.
the nurse sent in care personnel. He was, hey, can you go check on room 2 for me? Hey, CNA, room 2 needs water. Can you get that for me? Like, that person received care, but the nurse that was assigned to them didn't see them for 4 hours.
Right.
And so when it comes to actually dealing with those really obstinate people, there's an ideal, right? But I don't know that it's always attainable. So you just have to do your best. Um,
Mm.
and it also is different for like lay people, right? If you're like
Mhm.
having a conversation with a friend and they're talking about, say, the COVID vaccine, there's a lot of people who are very concerned about it, don't want to get it. There are some valid reasons for that. The vaccine has not been tested as much as vaccines previously have. That is out of necessity. Our global, we are in a global crisis. To develop a vaccine as quickly as we have, and multiple vaccines at that. I think they just
Mhm.
announced the Johnson & Johnson one a couple days ago.
That's the one I'm
Um,
hoping for.
yeah, and like that one, they're even talking about is less efficacious against the new South African strain that is currently becoming more and more prominent. But it's still an incredibly good bit of news, as I think Fauci said in his report tonight.
Yeah.
It's still a good thing because it may not be perfect, but it is going to provide and continue to work us towards that herd immunity. But
Right.
there's people who had issues with vaccines before COVID even, and so to those people, really all we can do is provide them with, previous data about vaccines, talk about, sure, there's some small inherent risks with basically any medical procedure under the sun, and vaccines are no different. There's allergic reactions, which very few have been reported for the COVID vaccine, which is to be expected. Allergic reactions to vaccines are relatively uncommon as long as you screen for egg allergies. That's been an interesting thing to learn about in nursing school. I didn't really know that before. But it's hard sometimes to even want to pick up that mantle. It's definitely something that people who seek the medical field are more willing to do, but it's really not any different from being willing to educate people on anything that, as our conversation is kind of focused on, you are passionate about. If you're passionate about something and you are confident in your knowledge base on it, you can teach people about it and inform them on it. And in a way, when you have such a level of expertise on something, you have that obligation to do so. To be, sometimes it's a calling to be a mentor. Sometimes it's just helping out somebody who inquires every once in a while. Obviously, it's a part of your work, right? A car mechanic helps people. I know very little to nothing about cars, and so when I take my car into a mechanic, they're using their expertise to help out my situation, and occasionally they will teach me as it's necessary. I took in my car recently, and the guy was telling me, "Hey, so you've got a small oil leak," and he explained to me briefly, the part that was needed for it and everything they need to do. And I'm like, I understood like 25% of those words, but I appreciate you taking that extra step for me.
Yeah.
And I think, and maybe it's the altruism, but I think if people were more willing to do that kind of thing and more willing to listen, I think it would help a lot with some of the issues that we have with discourse in this country. Our quickly dwindling ability to just have conversations about things with each other and be okay with disagreeing on things or whatever. There's other sides to that coin, like all opinions are valid. That's not always necessarily true, that kind of thing. But what do I know? I'm just, almost a nurse.
Right.
Yeah, I appreciate the title of medical expert, but I will clarify it's only because there are two people in this call, and I qualify as the medical expert here, as you qualify as the art and podcast expert. So
yeah, and this is only my fourth interview, so
there you go. Hey,
expert. Hey,
there you go. More than I've done.
But yeah, I think that is a good place to maybe wrap up this part of the podcast, and we got to head out to a bit of a break here. Let people know about our sponsors, and when we return from the break, there's a whole other side of Nick that we have not even touched on yet.
Oh boy.
The whole reason for our friendship. I really want to maybe get some of your thoughts on role playing and D&D specifically, all that kind of stuff. Just because I'm interested in learning a little bit more about your perspectives on that. Listeners, enjoy these ads. We'll be right back. Do you want to class up your gaming? Are you sick of card tables and cheap plastic sleeves for your character sheets? Do you like real wood and are convinced magnets are the only magic we have left in our current age of science? Then head over to legendcraft.ca to spruce up your tabletop gaming setup. They offer felt-top gaming tables with add-ons like cup holders, tablet holders, dice trays, roll boxes, and more. Newly released in January 2021 is their Magna Tracker system. With versions for both health and spell tracking, these sleek and stylish tracking boards come with magnetized tracking pips that allow you to slide them back and forth along clean-cut channels, making tracking your health and spell slots easy to use and read, all without the constant erasing and writing on your character sheet. And did I mention that both the Magna Trackers and the tables are customizable and personalizable? That's right. Your table and or Magna tracker will be one of a kind when you order at Legendcraft. Legendcraft is partnering with me to offer you a 5% discount on your orders at legendcraft.ca. That's right, you can get a 5% discount when you enter the code F_ART at checkout. That's F_art. Go to legendcraft.ca. That's legendcraft.ca with discount code F_art for 5% off. Legendcraft.ca. Order today. And welcome back from the break. Again, sitting here with my good friend Nick Stapleton. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be back.
So before the break, we talked about medicine and your interest in helping people. We talked about stress and the stress responses. And I think this might be a good segue into the next subject that I'd like to talk about. I'm not trying to lead you into answer here. Answer honestly.
Sure.
How do you like? Okay, so like, there has to be some level of empathy, right? To what you do. You have to be a bit of an empath. Part of that is kind of absorbing the stress and emotions of other people. How do you then exhaust those, like as like a car exhaust? How do you get rid of that stress yourself?
Yeah, in a variety of ways. One of my bigger passions or hobbies that I use to kind of like de-stress at the end of the day is gaming in various forms. I'll do mostly computer games, lots of different genres. Lately, I've been into more games with friends. I think the pandemic has kind of like pushed me towards wanting to have at least some social interaction, even when I can't, leave my house for everything.
Right.
And in addition, my other big passion within gaming is tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons primarily. That has kind of been a pretty big crux of my social life for better part of a decade now.
That's true.
I have other pursuits that I like biking and camping. Haven't been able to do that as much with the pandemic, but I like outdoors generally. I'm a fan of sports, but just haven't had like the social structure to participate in that for a while. We had a basketball hoop outside my old house growing up that I spent like every single day messing around with, and when we moved away, that was rough to leave behind. But yeah, so as of late, it's definitely been gaming in various forms.
Yeah, you say better part of a decade. It's been. I know it's been 7 years that we've played D&D
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
I actually just completely unrelated to this podcast. I just happened to notice I created my Roll20 account in 2014.
Yeah,
So that,
yeah, that's right.
and that's when we stopped playing World of Warcraft together. I think I've known you since 2013, right? Like early 2013.
That sounds about right.
Because I came back to World of Warcraft right before um Pandaria
Yeah.
came out. It was like February, I think, of 2011 or 2012. And I remember joining your guild right before Pandaria came out. I'd played for like a year or something.
Hmm.
And then I met you and your guild and all that. Yeah, man. Like we have been gaming together for Jesus, like 9 years now.
Yeah, that's about right.
It's been a long time. But yeah, so that is sort of the answer that I was thinking you were gonna say. which leads us into the next half of our conversation that I wanted to talk to you about, which was your interest in role playing games in general, both computer and tabletop or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, Again, kind of like digging into the reasons behind why we're interested in these things. I've talked about it before on this podcast from my point of view, but what is it about role playing and tabletop games in general um, that you really draws you in?
Well, like all things, it's really multifaceted. I would have to say, um, as I touched on briefly, not being able to engage in the social activity that is tabletop role playing games as much with the pandemic has been tough, and I think has had me missing the social connection of the game. That
Right.
has really it that distancing myself from it has given me that perspective that that social connection is really something I seek out and enjoy. I don't consider myself an over person. I'm more an introvert than an extrovert. Um, I don't mind social interaction. I'm kind of a nice medium between my brother and my sister. My older brother is the full recluse. The guy
Yes.
lives in a one person apartment and has one work friend. He's in contact with his family, but I keep checking on him, especially this past year with everything with the pandemic. I'm always kind of like trying to check in with people, make sure everybody's
Mhm.
doing okay mentally, because I know I've had days where I've struggled, and he's good, and he's always been kind of emotionally flat, so a little hard to read. But I
Right.
mean, as best as I know, my own brother, he's doing pretty well. And then my sister, on the other end, is a much more social person. She is still in very close contact with friends from college, and she has a boyfriend who she's gotten involved with his social circle and now has friends through him. And so she probably has, not hundreds and hundreds, but she probably keeps steady contact with, a couple dozen people, which is
Oof.
kind of unfathomable for me and literally impossible for my brother. So
Yeah.
I tend to be somebody who likes a group of around half a dozen people that I'm
Yeah.
in regular contact with. And that ebbs and wanes as, I'm working more or less, or now that I'm in school, I've got a few people through school that are kind of now part of my social circle. And so I've really found myself craving like that kind of social interaction, given our circumstances. And so I love what games like Dungeons and Dragons does for the social connection, because it is more than getting together and focusing your attention on something else. Like going out to a movie with friends is great. You can
Mhm.
enjoy the cinema, you can talk about it afterwards, you can um, critique it sometimes, like our friend group likes to do before and after. We've got some pretty tough movie critics in our friend group.
Yes, we
um,
do.
but and it's more than um, going out to like focus on something like and even though these sound similar, like a board game, like my family grew up on board games. We would play Monopoly and Scrabble and Mousetrap and Clue and everything under the sun. And as fun as those nights were, what D&D, what tabletop games take to the next level is it's you and a group of friends or acquaintances building a story together. And as somebody who grew up loving reading, I don't do it as much anymore. I've always really enjoyed writing. I've won a couple of small like awards and stuff in like grade school for my writing and poetry, even a little bit. I got published in a in a publication for my state of like elementary school poets. Um, it's terrible. I was in like fourth grade. It was about like nighttime or something, but
Yeah, it's cute that
it's
that's even a thing, though.
I know, right? Yeah. And I was in theater for a little bit in high school, and so I've always loved kind of like the social connection of like telling a story. And tabletop role playing games are kind of that crux where you get to build a story together as a group.
Right.
And um, and it's not something that's always so easily achievable. As you and I well know, we both have run Dungeons and Dragons games for
Yes.
a while. We're both dungeon masters, and the dungeon master, in a few words, is the person who kind of controls the world around the heroes or the world around the players. So you
Yeah.
normally have one dungeon master, and then everybody else at the table is playing a single character in this story. So if it's Lord of the Rings, you'd have a player for Frodo and Gandalf and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, and then you'd have one person who's running all of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
And as
Yeah,
it
the DM is like Sam and Pippin and Mary and
yeah, exactly, they control all those other side characters or the characters that don't get as much of the spotlight, and also the bad guys, and also the weather and everything, yeah, everything in between. And so
Sauron and Saruman, who for the longest time I thought were the same person.
yeah,
Because
that's
why would they have this similar name?
easy mistake,
Come
easy
on,
mistake.
Tolkien, why did you do that?
Both evil big bad guy, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Could you was I feel like he was just like Sauron sounds so cool. Sour Sour Man. Yeah. Yep, that's the name.
Yeah, that could have been his process, um but so the goal of these games is to kind of tell a story that you all enjoy. And so getting to put some of yourself into your characters always gives you that kind of personal connection to your story. But you can also use Dungeons and Dragons or other games as a great vent for kind of the stress, which everybody has a lot of that right now, more than we normally do.
Right.
um, you can play a character that's a little more off the wall. You can do things in the game that are, far above and beyond anything you would consider in real life. And, you can throw it away because it's a game. And um, sometimes people get a little carried away with that. I've been guilty of that myself. And, um, it is hard sometimes because the game does require a sort of a social contract of sorts. You need to all be kind of on the same page about like what you're cool with and what kind of story that you want to tell, and that's why it generally works better with close friends. But
Right.
um, I've had plenty of great experiences. I actually just had one um, over the winter break. A couple of my other fellow students in my nursing program were like, hey, we're kind of bored over break, let's do like a couple of sessions of a D&D game over Zoom. And so one guy offered to run it, and it only ended up being two of us, but the other girl had never played before, and so I kind of played a character alongside hers that complemented hers. And um, the DM and I did kind of a good job of give and take of like teaching the game and continuing this story. It was a very brief rendition of a popular Dungeons and Dragons module known as Curse of Strahd, and
Okay.
a lot of fun and very very lighthearted. And even having played Dungeons and Dragons, and I mean, I think the first time that I ever ran a game was 15 years ago, something like that. I learned a
Because
ton
you
of
guys
new
started
things.
in high school, right?
Yeah, yeah, high school. So like 2007, so 14 years. Um, but and so this guy kind of like showed me this he was very like fast and loose with the rules, which sometimes bothers people. Some people really like there's a rule book for the game that kind of gives some parameters to what the heroes can do. It's not just believe I'm going to say what my guy does and he does it.
Right.
There's some level of fate involved in rolling dice, but he was very fast and loose with things, but it wasn't in a way that was dissatisfying. I mean, having played the games for so long, I know the rules pretty well. I'm very passionate about it,
Hmm.
and I tend to be somebody that my groups turn to as, "Hey, how does this rule work again, Nick?" And
Right.
usually, I can give a pretty good answer off the top of my head. Um,
I can remember that was even a sticking point when I brought up like, "Hey, maybe we try a different system," and you were like, I like D&D. I know it. I'm comfortable here."
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And and I'll branch out eventually, and that's something that as the hopefully later this year things with the pandemic start to improve. A lot of us within our friend group have talked about wanting to get out to like local game stores and get back
Mm,
into truly social aspect of this, which is like meeting new people through it. It's like going out to a bar and having drinks with people, except you're playing a game. It'd be
yeah.
like going out to a trivia night at a local restaurant and like meeting people that way. Um, D&D has a very social aspect to it, and it's even great for people newer to the game. With that nursing program game being an example, this girl had some exposure to the genre of games through
Right.
media. She's seen like Critical Role, but she wanted to learn the game itself, and um, over the course of like 3 or 4 sessions, we played out a little story and were able to kind of have some character growth and some good interaction, and all in all, it was a lot of fun. And so yeah, definitely the social connection of these types of games is a huge draw for me. In addition to just the background of kind of loving stories and their various mediums of telling.
I like to. I was gonna say, you say about over 3 or 4 sessions. I really like the fact D&D, like, so rules aside, right? It takes a long time to like learn the all the nitty gritty rules, but as a player, you kind of don't need to know the rules if you have like a really knowledgeable narrator, DM, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Um, it's a lot different than like a sport or something
Hmm.
where like you can spend 3 sessions playing this game and get a really good handle on what it is, like, and I don't really know of many other hobbies, like interactive hobbies, right? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, your hobby could be, I will watch a lot of movies and talk about them, like that's different, but like I don't know a lot of hobbies that have such a low barrier to entry.
Sure. And I think that's kind of predicated on an understanding that the game has no, this may not be the best way to put it, but the game doesn't really have a right way to play it. There is a
Right.
rule book. There are certain ways that the game are laid out. But ultimately, and this is even said within the books, the authors of this game, the game designers, put in their books, this game is what you make of it. You can change and we encourage you to change or adapt these rules in ways that make fun for your group. What your group wants to get out of this game, take steps to get it. And in a way that can be done with any game, but the fact that it's encouraged in tabletop games is really interesting. And I think, in a word, kind of what you're getting at about the genre is, in a way, it's very accessible. Um,
Hmm.
it and there are certain standards, especially with the game getting much more popular in recent years due to several celebrity influences on it. um,
Yes.
there are starting to develop certain expectations for the game, sort of like expectations that people have for art in a way, when particular people come forward and present the game in a way that is very, very pleasing, or attracts a large following, Critical Role being a big example for Dungeons and Dragons specifically. People start to use that as a model for how the game should go. And um, I recently had started to run a game for a friend from work and his parents, who
Oh, cool.
were interested in the game. And they were having a great time with it, but they were very concerned about playing it right. And that was because, not to his fault, but my friend had gotten interested and started watching some podcasts of people play D&D. And so he was trying to teach them like their way of playing the game. Kind of like how you mentioned, if you have somebody running a tabletop game who's very knowledgeable of the rules, a player can sit down at the table and narrate to that game master what they want, and the game master, with their knowledge of the rules, can make that happen. A,
Yeah.
a player can actually have zero knowledge of the game's mechanics, it creates more work for the game master. Normally, it's understood that you should have some level. Okay, I at least know like my character's name and some very basic
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
what they look like. But beyond that, you can have um, a player say, "Hey, I want to move as close to that goblin as I can," and the game master can do that for him. Whereas at a different table, they might go, "Okay, my character's movement speed is 30 feet, so I'm going to move left around that log, which uses 15, and I'm going to use my other 15 to move next to that goblin."
Right.
There's two different tables there, but neither is wrong. Um, and even in the popular examples, I've seen it work both ways. I've seen players say, "Hey, what can I do here?" And then the game master can tell them, or
Hmm.
they know what they want to do and they will dictate it to the game master, and then the game master will tell them what ultimate role they have to make, or
Right.
what they have to accomplish.
And oftentimes those players are sitting next to each other at the same table.
Very often, yeah, yeah. So you can have mixed tables where you have some players with more and some players with less knowledge, and in fact, you're pretty much always going to have that. The only game that I'm in right now that's still running, I'm probably the longest. Um, Myself and the person running the game have played longest, and then the other two players alongside me are newer to the game, and so sometimes I have that mentor role, but that game's been going on for over a year now, and so the other players have settled in well enough that we're all kind of on the same page with that. Um, but everybody has to
Right.
start somewhere. But you make a very insightful point in that you can get up to speed with tabletop games pretty quickly, because in a way we've all done tabletop role playing. It shares many similarities with like play pretend when you're a kid. You're
Yep.
pretending to be a hero and you're going around and telling a story. Oh, I'm gonna save the princess, or I'm gonna beat the bad guy. And um in a way, this is like structured play pretend.
Yeah, it really is. In fact, I feel like the structure makes it possible. Um, so when I was talking with Turkey the other day, and he asked me how I got into D&D, one of the things I didn't end up touching on in that episode was kind of the actual impetus of why I like started like thinking of role playing and stuff. I can remember when I was a kid, 4, 5, 6 years old. Every summer we would drive from where we live in PA, Pennsylvania, down to South Carolina to my grandfather's place. And during those 13 and a half, 14-hour drives, um, my mother and I would play something that I dubbed the imagination game, which was role play with no rules. It
Yeah.
was, I was super into like Batman and Superman, so it was superhero themed, but it was mostly like we would both come up with a character, describe their like powers, and then start role playing, and it always devolved into one-upsmanship. And of course, I would always get frustrated because, you know, my my mother's matching wits with a 5-year old. It's like not. It's like shooting fish in a bucket for her to always get the upper hand on the things
Sure.
that I was trying to do. But I think the rules of D&D, like the limitations they put on the thing, the dice are the great equalizer, right? Um Something like uh, and it doesn't quite apply to what we were talking about, but like it really is like I think it helps in some regard even if you don't know what the rules are, right? Having those dice there and having that result and then having someone tell you this is the result. You might get frustrated that you didn't do better,
Hmm.
but you're not you're frustrated at the at fate, right? You're frustrated at the number on the die. You're
Yeah.
not frustrated with the person on the other side of the DM screen who said that you can't do that thing
Hmm.
because simply because they said you can't do that thing, right?
Yeah.
You can't do it because you rolled a 5 instead of a 14, right? Whereas like in completely lawless role playing, if you and again with the caveat, like you're not a practiced seasoned improv person who knows the yes and rule instead of the no but mistakes,
Yeah.
right? Like if you aren't into improv, if you're just trying to do this stuff without rules, there's oftentimes the whole like, well, you can't do that because my character actually has a power that negates your laser vision, right? Like you're like, but you didn't say that in the beginning, right? And all that. But
Yeah. Yep.
here you have like a set of rules, and like you might have a thing that negates his laser vision, and you can point to your character sheet and be like, there, it's right there. I have it on my character sheet. So haha.
There you go.
Right. And
Yeah.
then everyone's like, oh, all right, cool. And then you move on, and it doesn't, as the one thing like my sisters always bring up whenever we reminisce about those drives is like, yeah, you guys would just play that game for like 5 minutes and then argue for 35 minutes about like who actually got to do the thing.
Right.
Oh, but yeah, it's a fun time. Like I really like that. But bringing up like characters and playing stuff like that, where do you fall? Like you mentioned you've DM'd and you've been a player for a long time. Which side of the screen do you fall on? Like if you had to choose, which do you prefer, playing
Hmm.
or DMing?
I think this answer has changed like every year. Um, with each new game and each new experience and each new group, I find different things that I love about each side of the table. Right now, I think I fall into the realm of running a game despite not running any games right now and
Hmm.
having not run a game in a long time. You were actually in uh, the last game I ran, which I had
Oh
to
damn.
stop when I began nursing school.
Yeah, yeah.
I chose to end, or at least put on hiatus, potentially end the game that I was running for a large group of friends. I think there were 6 players. Is that right? Um,
Yeah, I think so.
that our groups normally stick to 3 to 4 nowadays. But back in the day, we ran a couple larger ones. Jeff ran a couple for us that were on the larger side,
Hmm.
and I think similar to the social connection, just the absence of having run a game or not run a game for so long
Right.
has, you don't know what you got till it's gone, kind of thing. Um,
Exactly.
I definitely find myself reminiscing on and wanting to return to, and a lot of it is that hindsight is 2020 as well. In that I think about that game that I was running, and I kind of get in my own head about some of the things I wasn't happy about. Kind of when I talked about in the first half of the podcast that I really like to make people happy.
Hmm.
There's kind of that people pleasing attitude that I have that can backfire sometimes. When I am running a Dungeons and Dragons game, if I, you know, try to create some sort of a storyline or um, even like a particular arc within a game, within a story, uh, I hope for a certain reaction from my players or for
Right.
them to indicate that they really are enjoying this or, yeah, this is great. And it can kind of backfire sometimes because then that means that I put a lot of emphasis on that validation from other people, which can be unhealthy. Um, Especially when things like self-esteem or your personal image can ride on that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
um, everybody's human, and so there were some things that happened in that game that I think I were mistakes, or the approach that I took to a particular part of the story didn't go over. I had a vision for something, and it just didn't play out as well um, as it looked on paper. And so um, I kind of, over these almost a year now that I haven't been running any games, I have kind of been mulling all of that over and hoping to come back swinging with some sort of a new or returning to that campaign. I told everybody when I put that one on hiatus, I'd check back in once I was done with my program. And now
Mhm.
we're about, 3-4 months away from that. God, 3-4 months away from that. And I'm excited at the prospect of returning to that.
And
That being said,
I'm
um,
excited to hop back in the pants of Luke Renard.
that's right. Yeah. Lucius Renard had a rather large kind of lore drop right at our hiatus there, which part of me has thought was maybe a mistake. But
Why?
um,
Oh, I'm interested. Why? Why do you think that was a mistake?
um, I think it's bad form sometimes to, uh, or at least in hindsight, I wonder if it wasn't bad form to um, reveal such a big part of the story and have all of that energy then dissipate over literally a year and a half. I mean, it will be exciting to, when I finally send out that message of, hey, thinking about getting the band back together, who all's still in, and seeing where the dice roll or the
Right.
numbers fall. Um, but I think I certainly I can't, I don't have that tool anymore, that literary or that narrative gripping tool. Um, I mean, I can use its aftermath for some
Hmm.
exciting things, but um, there's part of me that wonders if I shouldn't have kept that particular piece of ammo in my back pocket, as it were.
I can see where you're coming from, and for those listening, this is the first time that Nick and I have talked about this. So this is new information to me.
Yeah.
Um, I can say from my perspective, having that bomb drop and that sort of cliffhangery kind of like oh shit moment, like right before the fade to black credits roll kind of thing at the end of that, let's say, episode, right?
Mhm.
um that is the thing that, like, anytime I think of Luke or anytime I think of that game, that is the thing, like, oh yeah, we were in this weird cavern that like shifted and was trying to murder us, and then there's like this giant ass hole that we had to go down and like fight a thing, and then our guide was like up on the surface and kind of like, I want to go in the hole, and we're all like, you're gonna die, motherfucker, like stay out of the hole. And then like he like fucking cave opens up to the surface and he's like climbing down, and everybody in the group is like, I don't want him here, I don't want him here. And my character's like, well, if he dies, he dies, like whatever, like we can't stop him, he's his own person. And then fucking angel mode, for those of like listening, I play a half angel in Azamar. My father was an angel, so he like reveals himself as this angel. Like that's a thing, like it's been what, like 18 months since we've like, and me, like I don't remember shit well. Like I remember that like it was yesterday. Like
That's
I
awesome.
think it was
Yeah.
great. Like I don't know if that like puts any of your worries to bed or abates any of your fears on it, but like because I mean obviously it's my character, right? And that was like a big moment. Like I'm like, yeah, dude, like, let's fucking get back into this. Like, I want to have that moment, where I where I turn to Steve's character and be like, see, look, motherfucker, I was right this whole time. Like, you know?
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm relieved to hear that in a way. And I there's still part of me that worries about how I'm going to handle, stepping away from a game for so long and then returning to it, and whether, and that's something that I plan on working out with all the players, as any good game master would do. I'm going to work with all of you guys to figure out the best solution to move forward with. But not having that knowledge now kind of makes me a little anxious about,
Right.
because I've never had to like stop a game for so long. I've had a couple of games that took breaks, and some of those eventually ended. You and I have been in a couple of those, and
Mhm.
then some of them, we picked up again and finished a couple of weeks later, and so. But I've never been in this situation before, so it's kind of, just new
It does
terrain.
seem
But
like there is a certain series of games that we've played together, not DM'd by either of us, but seems to be fated to go off into hiatus at some point, never to be finished.
particularly rad games.
Yeah, just really super rad games with our boys.
Hmm.
John, if you're listening to this, can we play that game again? I really want to play that game again. Oh man. But yeah,
But
no, it's definitely like how I've never had to take a hiatus like that before.
yeah,
A couple weeks here or there, sure. But like multiple months or even how almost, a year and a half, almost 2 years.
yeah.
It's a big thing. Yeah.
And I've been
Um
heartened in, in that time span. I've had a couple of people hit me up about, hey, are you still looking at returning to your game? What's the timeline for that? Just a reminder. And yeah, coming up in May, or coming up, when hopefully I graduate. And um, so there's definitely still some interest in it. It's just it's a lot of time for
mhm.
the mind to kind of wander and brew up its own doubts and insecurities. And so I try to keep all that in line. But um, yeah, definitely looking forward to returning to running a game. But I have had continual exposure to continuing to be a player, which I do still very much enjoy. Like I said, the answer kind of flip flops back and forth for me. Um, I've been in a game for a little over a year now that is still meeting occasionally when we can during the pandemic, being socially distant and everything, but it is in person, which has been awesome. I did go a decent period where I played all of my tabletop games online through sources like Roll20,
Mhm.
and that format, is nice for scratching the itch, as it were. It is a great way to get friends together from all across the nation. I mean, we have players from Alaska, Texas, like Cape Cod, like all over the
Yeah.
place. And so we, that online medium is a necessity. But I'm very fortunate to have a couple of our squad here where I am, and we're able to meet for in-person games. We're doing roughly bi-weekly right now, sporadic with various issues with the pandemic, but still able
Yeah.
to meet. And that's been a lot of fun. It's great to have this continual character that I can come back to. And um, it's very interesting. I almost wonder if like full-blown actors in Hollywood don't go through this kind of similar process with their characters when they're shooting a movie over the course of months, where you feel this sort of maturation of the concept that occurs over time.
Yeah.
There are people who spend. I mean, I have read backstories that you've submitted, Jeff, for some of our games that have spanned 12 pages. And I have seen a backstory that was literally just the Fresh Prince of Bel Air intro. Um, and so it's the full spectrum, where no matter how much preparation you really do before going to any of these games, you don't have a full concept, I believe, of the character until you've stepped in their shoes and played it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you get this sort of evolving that occurs, where you have this vision for the character, and then you realize there's aspects of that vision that don't feel as natural when you're playing the character out, and so you substitute with something. It might be in the moment, or it might develop over the course of a couple games, but eventually you um, kind of roll into certain niches you like. And then our game has been going on long enough, which this is what I really love, to the point that my character is now changing again based on the other characters in my group. Because
Nice.
throughout the course of our story, my character has grown to care for his friends. And so he wants to accommodate for him more. So my character, not to get too much into it, but he's a very kind of like strict, jolly but kind of uptight individual. He's an actual knight, a member of the nobility, and so he follows a knightly code. His friends are a bit more loosey goosey. They don't follow these codes. They're a bit mischievous at times. And at first, he was very absconding of their behavior. And now, over the course of the game, he's kind of been broken down, if you could say, a bit by bit, to the point where um, he understands that a lot of their mischief is generally in good nature, or harmless by and large. And so he grew to tolerate it, and now he's even helped out on occasion with a harmless prank here and there. So you get this growth that I really love with characters, and I'm hoping as our group continues to play that we can become more comfortable with really being open with characters, and showing emotion, and that's something that's important to discuss with any social tabletop game. What
Mm,
boundaries are you okay with going to? But
right.
talking about emotional barriers of like loss. My character has a particularly tragic event in his backstory that he's struggles with some depression, and actually had a pretty dark period of time in his backstory before the events of the game began, where he found these two friends, and they really have kind of helped him turn his life around. He tends to, being the knightly type, he tends to hide it behind a veneer of honor and bravery, but he and much like we circling back,
Mm-hmm.
much like we've talked about getting rid of stress and using these mediums
Mm-hmm.
as good ways to cope, I am channeling a lot of that, a lot of my own issues with depression and self-esteem issues through this character. And
Right.
um, it's very cathartic to have that opened up gradually. I mean, none of us at these tables are licensed therapists or anything, but I imagine it
Right.
would be kind of like how a therapist, over the course of multiple sessions with a patient or with a client, would be able to kind of slowly peel away the layers of
Yeah.
a particular issue somebody has.
It's
Um,
also like if it's a game that I'm thinking of, like this started before the pandemic hit, and
oh yes,
it's
we were.
interesting then to see the parallels between a character who was dealing with what sounds like dealing with sort of some isolation and depression issues, and then to live that
Yeah.
alongside of a character who's working through those same things.
Yeah, absolutely. I do find that sometimes the game can reflect experiences in real life and teach lessons that, through interacting with a group of people and seeing this story. I mean, people have been using stories to teach lessons for ages. Aesop's fables and all sorts of epics that through the ages um, have kind of taught us some basic lessons of life. These stories that we create with our friends can do very similar things.
Yeah, it's very amazing, and yeah, it's man, I just keep thinking back to like the point that you made about saying, how you really need to like get into the character's shoes over a couple of sessions to like really flesh them out, because like as you said, I wrote a backstory for a character. It was like 12 pages long. I also, in our group, I think I have the record for, other than people who haven't written anything for their backstories. I feel like I might, this, some of your other games have like broken this record.
Mhm.
Not only do I have the record for the longest backstory, I also think I have the record for the shortest backstory, which was just remember what I said.
Now, that's kind of cheating, though, because what you said was a little bit longer. But yes, I will give it to you. In terms of word count,
In
I think
terms
you
of
have the
word count of what
shortest.
was on the page that people could refer back to, it
Yeah.
was the shortest.
It was very fitting for
Uh,
the character, though. I think you told me that the inspiration for that particular character was just the dwarfiest dwarf who ever dwarfed. Just
yeah,
like
yeah, that also, yeah, that could
ale
also be
and
his backstory.
family and honor and elf suck. Like that was the character.
Yeah, that
And
was,
of
yeah,
course,
literally the
he got
character.
partied with two elves, one of
Two
which was a
elves.
drow. And
Yeah, and not just
um,
partied with them, but like in the first episode, we all like found this artifact that like linked our souls together.
yeah, it was like you're in this for the long haul together.
Yeah,
And
could not get away from it. But the irony of that situation, right, is both of them were dwarves, right? But freaking it is a testament to like what I'm about to say, right? I can't even remember right now the name of the character with the 12-page backstory.
when he didn't last very long either, right?
Well,
There was some frustration because, and this is something that the dice kind of do. They can be cruel. Fate can be cruel.
mhm.
You built this incredibly detailed and epic
Yep.
backstory for this one character, and then you just poor guy could not roll
could
well at
not
all.
roll.
Just everything
Yeah,
just flopped and failed, and he didn't
it
look like a
was.
he was supposed to be this grizzled like veteran hunter, and just
Yep,
didn't come out that way in the dice.
could not do it.
And it like
Could
spurned
not
you
do
away
it.
from the character, and that can happen at times. And then
I mean,
the
I
other
finished out
character,
that mini campaign
yes,
with that character, but yeah, he was just. It's one of those things of like you never know what's going to happen until you're in the game, right? You write a 12
right,
page backstory, you create like 3 different cities and like 12 NPCs for the DM to use if he wants to or not.
hmm
And you write this backstory, build your character mechanically to own in a campaign about hunting monsters and beasts, and you choose as a ranger that your favorite enemies are monsters and beasts, and then you just can't roll above a 5 on the die in
yeah,
any given fight, and you just suck at what you're supposed to do.
and it's
Versus,
frustrating.
you have this like really fleshed out character idea, and then conversely, with Mordu Steelheart, the dwarfiest dwarf who ever did dwarf, like that character, I had barely any concept in that game going into it other than what you said. Ale, family, tradition, elves suck, right?
Yeah,
And then the character arc of that character of like realizing that okay, even though stereotypical, we got some a drow here who's way unlike what I had ever like come to know what drow were supposed to be
yeah,
like.
she was happy, bubbly, like
Yeah,
fresh to the
innocent to the
world,
world,
loved nature.
druid,
Yep.
like yeah, super not at all like what his character had like preconceived notions of what that race was supposed to be like. And then, I think your character was a wood elf, right?
Yes. Yep.
But also kind of rejected that wood elfy kind of
Yep.
like, oh, I'm a tree hugging hippie. Like you were a paladin of like
I was a paladin
civilization.
of civilization. Yeah,
Yeah, like
my character was all about the balance between man and nature. Like preserve both. Like why not
yeah.
both?
And my little dwarf brain was just like, what? And like over the course of the campaign, it was just like fucking okay, like these people are way different than what my dwarf only city told me about these people. But not only are they like a lot different than what I like learned, but they also have like a sense of honor and a like like there are elements of your characters like tradition and honor and respect that like
Like
as a
preserving
dwarf
life
you're
and
like I can respect this, like I can understand these people a little bit better. And by the end of it, like I was playing as a forge cleric who like I had powers to like repair buildings and build stuff. And I had been forced into questing because my city had been destroyed by orcs. Whole game, my whole goal was I want to rebuild my dwarven empire. It's like city, right? I want to rebuild, go back to the mountain, clean up the thing, like retake it, all that stuff. But by the end of the campaign, it was just like, nah, man, like fuck that noise. Like we don't need that shit. And I established a city on the surface for everybody.
yeah.
Like it was a multicultural kind of thing. Like so to it's really insane to see how playing some a couple of sessions to kind of get into the character, and then over the course of a campaign to see them change.
Mhm.
And it doesn't really matter what your backstory is, right? It can be a sentence, it could be 12 pages, it could be whatever.
Mhm.
It's gonna change
Yeah.
immediately upon entering the game and then continue to change throughout the whole thing.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
there's a great way to sum it up that I forget where I heard this. I watch various Dungeons and Dragons YouTube content, and it might have been WebDM, I think, mentioned in one of their videos about one of the most important parts of your backstory is the blank space at the bottom.
Right.
Just knowing that, and there's a lot of people who will, and I made this mistake. One of my beloved character concepts that I almost want to play someday, almost to rectify her in a way. Um, that I had this long fleshed out backstory for that I even wove into when I first ran my like first like fully original game concept. I wove her story into my world. She's this really powerful um, sort of like force within the world
Hmm.
um, that I was an original character concept of mine. Um,
Am I thinking is it are
this
we
is the
talking?
it's the paladin, yes, that I played in the first
Okay,
Rad
yeah.
game. I had this
Who
super
saved
fleshed
us
out
from a
backstory.
purple worm?
Yes, yes, yes. And so I had this backstory for her and this very, very fixed vision for her that really did not clash well with playing with others. She's very much like a kind of edgy, like loner, like I'm really mad at my god, so I'm mad at everything else too. And
She was scary.
she was scary. And I um I really did not play her with this open-ended backstory. I wasn't like going into the game expecting her to be changed by the events, and boy, should I have, because that that was a wild game. It was essentially, I think the closest approximation I could make for that game is taking a character and having them thrown into like an Alice in Wonderland type situation,
Yes,
but
yeah.
like cranked up to 10. Like
It's cranked up to
from
11.
a regular world to just super super wacky. And
Yeah.
I had this super serious character concept that just did not gel well with that. And um really, as I've grown as a tabletop role player, I've come to discover that it's so much more fun to have a character that is molded by the experiences of the game. Backstory
Right.
can certainly influence a character, like the one I'm playing now, the knight. He's got that tragic past, but he's not constantly brooding or constantly bringing it up or focusing his every goal around going back for to try to rectify that tragic part of his past. He's moving forward as people do. um, we everybody has their own struggles and their own issues that you get past or you don't. And a lot of people will do that with friends. And so this night, having had to live with his tragedy for so long, finally finds a couple of people who are willing to accept him as a little bit eccentric and strange for his type as he is. He's a half giant, so not a very
Oh hell yeah.
typical member of nobility, which is often in games kind of like elves or humans or
Hmm.
much more like traditional. So he kind of has this identity crisis, ergo me playing that out. And um, and so I've had so much fun with this character whose backstory is half a page about.
Oh yeah.
I'm able to summarize on the second page of my character sheet. There's this little window that is probably maybe 4 inches high and like 2 inches wide that I was
Yeah.
able to parse down his whole backstory into. It's less than 100 words easily. Um, so and this character I have had an incredible amount of growth with and enjoyed immensely. Whereas that paladin character I played had a 5-page backstory that
Right.
I want to redo. I don't want to play her that way anymore.
Man, I think the moral of the story for our listeners here, and we'll end with this. I think this is a good thought to go out on when it comes to playing role playing games. Don't overthink it.
Yeah,
Just don't overthink it.
just
Really, have an idea of their personality, have an idea of where they came from, but don't overthink it. Let the game be the game. Let yourself give over to the world, because both of us have put a lot of effort into backstories for our characters, and both of those characters we have regrets about playing.
yeah, yeah.
And both of us have had characters with very brief backstories that we just let ourselves be the game, be in the world, and see where the road takes us. And I think from what you've been saying, I know from my experience with Mordu, like very, very enriching and wonderful experiences to have had.
Yeah, absolutely. It at the end of the day, the game can offer incredible experiences, but it is a game, and so
Mhm.
the main goal is and always should be You're there with a group of friends or acquaintances for everybody to have a good time. And that's the crux of it. And you're there to tell a story together.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Nick, thank you so much for hanging out with me and having this conversation. I can safely say this is probably the longest episode so far.
Sorry to
Uh,
talk your ear off.
no, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. I
Yeah.
think that goes back, like, we've known each other for so long. We have a good rapport with each other, so it's easy.
Storied history.
Yeah, literally, with all the D&D we've played together.
Hey.
Very storied history.
Yep.
But yeah, everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of Thought Balloons. um like I said, don't overthink it, whether it's games or life, and we'll see you next time. Oh no, stop the recording.